Go.
Okay, it's time for our show, the one we call Cock and Bull, the version from Cyrus Says, which some people say is far more interesting, which is not saying much, of course. Sachin Kalbag, veteran journalist, award-winning writer, a person who has a following of 67 lakh people, 50 lakh of them being educated, will join us in a second or two. But first, I have my test, which I want to share with you. Not my COVID test that I keep to myself, failing every month. So what's the point of sharing that with you till I find the right provider who gives me the result I want? No, the test I'm talking about is your Deshbhakt test. Are you a Deshbhakt? And the way to prove this is very simple. Right now in Mumbai, as we are falling and dying, across India, in fact, not just Mumbai, London, Great Britain recovering. Okay, so pubs are opening, cafes are opening, parks are opening, theaters are opening. So their lives are coming back. The test here for all Indians with lots of money, like my friend Kunal Vijayakar is, are you going to then rush off to London while Mumbai burns? If you stay in Mumbai and face pandemic too, you're a Deshbhakt. If you rush back to London, you are no longer a Deshbhakt. This is my question. Let's see if anybody can answer that, because I've already met a couple of people who said they're dying to go back. Only the Boris Johnson restrictions with the COVID passport is a bit of an issue, which they're trying to sort out. But that kind of red tape between India and England is always there. And there's always a jugaad path that finds you in the place you want to be. Okay, let's quickly welcome Sachin Kalbag, Silvery, and Amit Doshi. This is the only part of the show where I'm ecstatic. After I welcome them, it's all downhill from here. We're going to start, Silvery, with a very sad situation in India at the moment,
Yes.
where lockdown, which is not a full lockdown, according to Shri Uddhav Thackeray, I've not understood that still, is in place. Amit is all for it. I'm still very much against it. And Sachin Kalbag is the voice of reason, because he basically talks to infants like me every day on his podcast and deals with all kinds of philosophy when it comes to how to end this. End is the wrong word. How to just live through it, I suppose. Sachin.
Yeah, so it's a policymaker's dilemma. I mean, I know where you're coming from, Cyrus. I mean, the last year's lockdown was terrible for everyone, right? I mean, we lost our jobs, we lost our salaries, we lost our livelihoods. People were dying on the streets because they were walking all the way thousands of kilometers back to their hometowns, and even for the media, for instance, advertising was down, so people were losing jobs. Uh, Last time I heard, 22,000 journalists in India have lost their jobs. So it's not that our sector is unaffected. So I'm as affected as anybody else. So I think this time the policymakers' dilemma was very clear. How to balance the lives versus livelihood question. I think that was one of the reasons that the whole lockdown decision was delayed. Uh, there were multiple talks. In fact, the running joke in our newsroom was that this whole lockdown decision by Uddhav Thackeray was like a Nordic murder mystery. It goes on for 20 hours in all excruciating detail, and at the end you realize it's a neighbor who killed. So ultimately, we did get the partial lockdown, but it was not overwhelming or underwhelming. So it's somewhere in between. But I'm hoping that because this strain of the virus that we have this year is so virulent that any stoppage of movement of people, any way that we can stop people from interacting, even if it's for 2 weeks, will help in terms of reducing the caseload. And not just in Maharashtra. I think the Maharashtra strain is a little more virulent, as we've seen from the various studies that we have read about. But this is now happening across the country. So my feeling is that various states will announce their own versions of a lockdown.
Okay, just to not to be a picky for about details, but it's not 2 weeks, it's 18 full days. I did the maths on it, because 14th evening to first evening, which is a bloody public holiday for 20,000 reasons, which takes you straight into second. So it's not 14, it's already 18, it's closer to 21. And but I just think that hasn't the horse already bolted? Will it make sense to have a lockdown now? We've already got the numbers, astronomical sort of numbers being generated. Isn't it a bit too late? In which case, all we're going to do is suffer more economically and otherwise.
Well, what do
Uh,
those numbers multiply?
They will multiply. The only way out is survival of the fittest. I don't see any other way out. You have to keep the less, majboot people at home. And the rest have to take their chances, and we have to get herd immunity. Please give me a better solution, guys. You're locking people up for 2 weeks, and then what? There'll be a huge surge. Silvery screamed yesterday at me. He said, "Bro, I can't take this nonsense. After 2 weeks, I leave my house, and you've got numbers down. It's a temporary sort of fix it, and then you enter into the market again, and in 3 days it boomerangs the other way." It's not like
You make a good point, Cyrus. There are a lot of people who think the same way. There is absolutely logical paths to what your thought process is. Uh, so see, I was reading an article in Nature magazine yesterday, and they had surveyed a lot of epidemiologists and virologists from across the world, and they have access to the best of the best. And almost all of them said that COVID is here to stay. So whether you have a vaccine or not, whether you have a lockdown or not, COVID is here to stay because the mutant strains, like we have with influenza epidemics, for instance, every year, if you're in the US, for instance, every year you have to take a flu shot for a different strain of the flu virus. So the COVID is now, of course, I'm not getting into the scientific detail because I'm not a scientist, but from what I understood is that the mutant strains, I mean, the strains will keep mutating, through the years, and COVID is not going to go away. I think policymakers and public healthcare experts and the government will have to sit together and say, how can we resolve this in the long term? There are short-term issues and there are mid-term issues, but what happens to my daughter, 10 years from now? What happens to our children or grandchildren 10 years, 10, 20, 30 years from now? Those are the policies that we need to start thinking about now. We have already lost a lot of time. 70 years in India, of course, across the world, we're facing the same issue. 70 years, we did not, put in more than 1.5% of our GDP on public healthcare. And the result of ignoring public healthcare for the last so many decades was seen in the last 1 year, and we're seeing it even now. And this will continue. It's not going to stop, right? So the only way that we can protect our children, apart from all the other issues like nuclear crisis and climate change and water disappearing from the face of the earth and all of that, there are some immediate concerns like the virus. So the next 20 to 30 years, how are our children, how we ourselves and our grandchildren are going to survive is something that we need to start making policies on right now. We can't waste time. So yes, the 2-week lockdown is a matter of debate. It'll go on. I mean, you will have your own point of view. The government
18
will have
days.
their own 18 days.
It could be longer, right? So
And
Could be
Sachin,
longer. Yeah.
Sachin, just on a slightly different note, a lot of copulating has taken place in the last 14, 15 months in spite of the pandemic. You just spoke about next generation, the one after that. We have 4 people who had become fathers in the last 2 weeks here in CNBC. And I'm thinking, doing the maths, that right in the middle of the heavy lockdown one or pandemic one, they were humping around left, right, and center and begetting children. So not such a bad time, when you think you're miserable and all that. Somebody's getting it off. Yeah, there's a gentleman right here who's one of those.
It is backed by economic theory, Cyrus.
Which is?
So the thing is that if you study economics in Bombay University, the first year, undergraduate level. So because I didn't get into engineering because my parents were forcing me into engineering, but I didn't get it, thankfully. So I was doing math, stats, and economics at Bombay University. So when we were studying economics, one of the books that you have to learn is a book called Indian Economics. Okay. So Indian Economics, there's a chapter on why India's population grew so much in the 60s and the 70s, when there was a huge population boom after partition and after independence. So one of the theories that is quite prevalent amongst economists at that point of time was that Indians did not have any other source of entertainment because we didn't have electricity. So there was no television. We didn't have enough radio sets. We didn't have because there was no electricity. Villages were not lit up. There was load shedding across all the urban centers. So what did people do? People copulated. And
so let me put it in perspective. What you're saying, Sachin, is that when there's no other entertainment, no other whatsoever, we're talking basic radio, TV, neighbors playing cricket or whatever, the only option is to have sex.
Is what the economic theory is about. Now, of course,
thank God for the IPL. That should put a lid on this damn thing. We should have a longer IPL for sure. Yeah. So anyway, maybe that's a positive note that people were begetting children left, right, and center, so they're dealing with the pandemic in some way. Or, of course, there's nothing left to do, as Sachin points out, and hence this is what came off it. And of course, it doesn't mean the women were having a good time. It's just a lot of men who insisted on begetting the kids. Silvery? What was your sex life like? Oh, your mom listens to the show. Don't answer that.
Yeah. No sex life. Sex?
Oh,
What is sex?
such a Sharif boy. You'll save it up for your marriage, no? When
Yeah, of
mom and dad
course.
choose the bride for you, and
No, not even after marriage. Not even
yeah,
that.
वहाँ पे भी
No,
कोई
no,
yeah,
never.
there'll be a COVID test and all that has to be done.
Yeah.
Look what we've inherited: HIV testing, COVID testing. There's no end to it. Romance is killed as far as we're concerned. Chalo, sorry. Let's get on with it. What is the
Yes.
first actual topic?
Well, I mean, like they're
The
all
first,
COVID topics, aren't they?
they're all mostly related. Yes, very highly
That's, I mean,
related.
like
We
that's
can't run
the.
away from what you would call the elephant in the room, which we did not use at the right time, in the right place in the last podcast. So I guess we just have to face it.
Yeah.
Yep. So the first topic
Can
then
can I
is
just one
yep.
before you start? Can I ask Sachin, since he's actually the expert here and has been dealing with people like me, all sides of the fence when it comes to COVID? What about the fact that Sachin, a lot of people just keep sending research out, but they don't actually research it themselves. They forwarded WhatsApps and things like that, where they just come up with a figure, just come up with a statistic, and very often I think that's also very dangerous, isn't it? This half information that you just push forward all the time, and that puts more paranoia and anxiety into everybody else. But you yourself are not thorough about it. You haven't actually researched it yourself. You haven't gone through lots of reports, the pros and cons, weighed it here and there, local conditions as against global conditions, etc. Generally, just a simple WhatsApp forward, and it just got a tone of doom on it, and it goes into the universe, and there's more anxiety.
Yeah. So I've been telling people, through my other podcasts and through my writings, editorials, and even just simple WhatsApp conversations, the misinformation pandemic is actually worse than the original pandemic that we're dealing with. Of course, we're dealing with deaths, but the kind of anxiety that people get, or the kind of false hope that some people get. Oh, you can use this to cure yourself of COVID. You can do this to prevent COVID from coming. The virus doesn't think like that, right? I mean, the virus doesn't even think. I mean, it has just one purpose in life: to procreate and mutate and preserve its so I mean, DNA is the wrong word, but preserve its DNA for forever. So that's why it keeps mutating. So the virus doesn't read your WhatsApp messages. So I keep telling, at least the one change that I've seen in the last 1 year in my family groups and my friends groups is, now instead of just forwarding it, they say, Sachin, is this true? And
And that's great, actually.
yeah, and they that's great progress, I think.
They put the pressure on him.
Yeah.
Well, that part sucks, right? But at least there is a thought before the forward,
Yeah.
right? That hey, I mean, like there is a kind of speed breaker that comes on, which is not there in my family at all, right? I mean, like I just get like ton on the family groups. You just get
Amit,
all
you'll
the nonsense
notice
in the
that
world.
along with the forward, they have their one bit of information, which is, guys, watch out, and then pass on this thing. Guys, this just be careful. It's always that sort of proclaimer along with the.
Well, actually, the most common ones I feel are like, WHO says, or
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
UN Security Health Council, something like,
But even
put together
WHO
like
has a
some
ring of
7
truth to it.
words.
I get people saying top scientists are saying, what the hell is top
Yeah.
scientists? For God's sake. I mean,
Cyrus, in reality, the top scientists never ever say that they are the top scientists.
exactly. It just all sounds wrong. Yeah.
So the only way to counter this is tell people that, see, every single organization now has a verified Twitter handle or a Facebook handle, or anything that have a verified website. All you have to do is just make one additional click and go there. I mean, that's all I tell my friends and family members. And over the last few years, they've actually progressed to saying, okay, is this true? Should I even forward it to somebody? So then I have to counter that. So which is why I was telling Amit prior to the recording, is that half my day just goes in busting all those myths, because I'm so afraid of wrong information being forwarded that people get scared. A therapist friend of mine, and he's a secretary of the Bombay Psychiatric Association, Dr. Milan Balakrishnan. He works from morning till late night, dealing with anxious patients, people who are troubled by all this information, negative information that is coming in. Journalists, I mean, we have to deal with this from 7 in the morning till 1 o'clock at night. And now, I mean, not even that now, it's a 24/7 news cycle. It's just impossible to separate your real life versus the COVID life. I mean, I don't know how you guys deal with it, because you are even under greater pressure for deadlines. But
I follow the government directive, which is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Don't do anything before and after that. Don't upset the government, whatever happens. Just within the white lines. Always play within the white lines. Yeah. Anyway, I think that takes care of the misinformation. Talk to Sachin. Sachin uncle will answer all your questions and hopefully clear the path. Yeah. Silvery, what is an
Yep.
actual formal kitty?
Yep. All right. Let's begin with the topics. First is the Kumbh Mela, as you all know, is going on right now. The third day of the Kumbh Mela saw the largest number of people, close to 31 lakh people, on at the Kumbh Mela. Basically, more than 1,000 of them have tested positive for COVID. And even
Okay.
then, the
Keep in
Uttarakhand CM
mind,
has
keep in
said
mind,
that
when you,
they won't cut it short. They won't cut the Kumbh Mela short. It'll
uh,
continue till all the days
one
as
second,
it
one
will
second.
continue
First,
till.
put in perspective. 1,000 have tested for positive because very few have been tested in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
so that's not an actual number. That's a number that is available. Okay, which as
Correct.
you
Correct.
say is bad
Absolutely.
enough. 1,000
Yeah.
should be closed down immediately. But
Yeah, 1,000, but in 31 lakhs, already even those 1,000 people have spread to so many more people, obviously. So they are saying
28,
that
the
this is
Shahi,
definitely going to be a super spreader event, like without fail.
Monday night, the Shahi Snan, the Royal Bar, 28 lakhs. Yesterday you mentioned 31 plus lakhs. I
Yeah,
did just look at pictures of that. Okay, the masks and all have
oh
gone
man.
haywire.
Yeah, yeah,
You
exactly.
know, I mean, this the least problem now is where's the mask because and they're all in touching distance. They're actually touching.
Yeah,
Sachin. What about this? You know, they're making us follow rules here in Mumbai and Pune and what have you. But you have such a huge event. I mean, what's the point of doing anything?
So
Yeah,
do you think there is a thing over there around, like, I was reading about this, that there's a case being made that Maharashtra and Karnataka and Delhi, where you're seeing greater rises, are more accurate in their counting compared to other parts of the country. Do you think there is some truth to that as well?
so several scientists have mentioned that. In fact, yesterday, the Washington D.C. based Center for Disease Economics and Data and Policy, the director there, Dr. Lakshminarayan, Ramanan Lakshminarayan, was clear about this. He said the number of policy bottlenecks and the testing bottlenecks that India has. This is, of course, not verified through actual data, but this is what his studies show, is that India is underreporting by about 30 times. So in actuality, we might have a lot many more. Even if we discount that for a hyperbole, let's say it's not 30 times, but let's say
10
3 times,
times. Yeah.
yeah, or 10 times, whatever. Because of the testing bottlenecks, you have a lag. So even now, if you go to any Mumbai lab or Delhi lab, which are the two best cities for getting testing, getting yourself tested in terms of number of labs, you still have a 2-day waiting list. People can't come. If you suppose you are feeling feverish or ill and you're not supposed to get out of the house, you have to get a home test done. You have a 2 or 3 day waiting list. By that time, the doctors have to decide whether to start the treatment or not. They're not sure of the diagnosis. In Lucknow, where the testing labs are not even up to scale, you have a 5-day waiting list. Many private labs have even stopped testing right now. So the policy bottlenecks, the thing that we spoke about in the previous segment, that we have not scaled our public health care in the last so many decades, and we are looking at the effect now. It's like how Roger Federer says, right? I mean, he trains for 20 years for that one shot. It's not that the shot has happened at that instant. He has trained for that for 20 years. All of the best sports people do that. All the best musicians do that. They train for so many years for that one sweet single moment of their concert or their match. As far as public healthcare policy is concerned, we have failed miserably because we have not gotten ourselves ready for that one moment, that one black swan event that people keep talking about. We haven't done that. So the testing bottlenecks are uh, going to result in two things. One, like Amit pointed out and Antariksh pointed out, is that we're not able to understand what is the extent of the spread of the disease in society, in our society, in our communities. The second thing is, because we are not able to do that, the severity of the disease, especially with the vulnerable population, that's people with comorbidities, senior citizens, and sometimes even kids, we have no idea what the impact will be. And because we had no idea in December and January and February, we are seeing the impact of that in March and April. and it's going to go on for at least a couple of more months, because Maharashtra now. So again, a study that was done by TIFR, that is Tata Institute of Fundamental Research and the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, yesterday, and it was released yesterday, and it is the story is there in our paper Hindustan Times today. And the mathematician from Middlesex University, Murad Banaji, Dr. Banaji, and all of them have said that because we are testing more and we are not hiding data in Maharashtra, uh, you know, we may have reached the peak of the second wave in Mumbai. And things may only get better now in terms of caseload. In the first or second week of May, you'll probably see a lot more fatalities because the people who get tested now, may succumb to their infections a couple of weeks from now. But we hopefully the mathematical projections now say that we are now at the peak, and from now it can only be either a flat plateau or a downward curve. So which is why testing is important. So the impact of testing is seen in policy in the long term and the midterm as well. So which is why we need to ramp up our testing now. The other thing that people keep talking about, and Antariksh pointed out, briefly in his point, is that people now say that the fatality rate, the case fatality rate, that is for every 100 people tested, how many people die from COVID? That is a case fatality rate. In Maharashtra, in the month of February, the case fatality rate was close to 3%, and actually in January, it was close to 3%. 3 people out of every 100 people die overall. That has now come down to 1.66 as of yesterday. That is 14th of April. So people say, oh, what a great work Maharashtra must have done, that, number of the case fatality rate has come down. But this is how you can lie with statistics or manipulate with statistics. You see, when your case fatality rate is low because your case load is now 60,000 per day. It was 3% or 2% when it was 8,000 per day or 10,000 per day. Now it is 1.5 or 1.66% when it is 60,000 per day, right?
Sheer numbers is still more.
The sheer so absolute numbers are something. It's under the umbrella of overall percentages. We can't hide that the umbrella itself is so large, right? So a little bit of arithmetic knowledge and arithmetic common sense, will help us to have better policies in the long term. I keep talking about policies because we have failed miserably on that front. Uddhav Thackeray, our chief minister, also mentions that people are not COVID. They do not indulge in COVID appropriate behavior, which is true. I mean, if you go to the market, if you go to the beaches, now of course the beaches are shut, but when you went to the beaches, you saw literally thousands of people there at Juhu Beach or Chowpatty, not wearing masks, sitting together. And because those beaches are not the size of Marina Beach in Chennai, they are densely packed. So people are literally within halitosis distance of each other. So you have a tremendous amount of spit coming out, or your aerosols coming out of your mouth and going to other people. And these are things that are invisible to us. But the virus is so small that it can literally travel within minutes from one host to another. And that's where your problem lies. So wearing masks is something that is as basic as ABC, and it is still not doing it 1 year after the pandemic began. So basic stuff.
Silvery.
So, sorry. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to mention with Silvery because we used to do the show from 2 feet away from each other before pandemic.
Sorry, Science, can you raise your mic a bit? Sorry.
No, I'm saying we used to do the show from the studio, remember, in Khar? So
Yeah,
from close by. And we used to spit a lot on each other. I remember. I frequently caught some saliva on your beard and all that from me, and vice versa and all that. So people don't realize this, how much saliva actually goes out when you're sitting close by, especially if you're one of those people with extra saliva in your mouth. Sorry. Now back to the more serious discussion from Amit. Amit, yes?
No, I was what I was asking Sachin is, so has the mortality rate of India as a country increased in the last year, where we can kind of see these hidden deaths that might be there? Because it's it's always a question that I've kind of wondered, right? That I mean, like we talk about like we're not capturing all of this stuff, and if the infection rate is higher, but the mortality rate has not significantly increased, then that means that we probably have more than 3% or 1.66%, or a better rate than that, if that is the case, right? Because that denominator is higher. But from what I understood, there isn't an increase in general mortality overall in the country. Does that?
Yeah, but he's
So
mentioned. Yeah,
in
sorry.
Mumbai, for instance, that is partly true, Amit. But in Mumbai, the BMC is one of the few municipal corporations that actually, captures all this data. So in October 2020, we had close to 13,000 deaths recorded in the month in Mumbai.
Okay.
The previous year, we had 7,000 deaths. So where did these extra 6,000 deaths come from? So that is a question that healthcare experts need to ask first.
Right.
Uh, and if Mumbai has those many excess deaths over last year, and the population hasn't changed much, which means that there are so many hidden deaths that we are not aware
Yeah.
of. Last year, if you remember, in the month of May, the BMC, like many other municipal corporations across the country, had taken over 80% of all the private hospital beds for COVID treatment. And it still continues to a great extent, which means that people with other issues, dialysis, kidney issues, heart issues, cancer, any kind of infection, were not given the same kind of treatment because this was a public health emergency.
Mhm.
It still is, but at that time, when we were not able to figure out what exactly is wrong, and we were just still evolving in our knowledge about COVID-19, it became an emergency, public health emergency at that point of time. So everything was, all the doctors were transferred to the COVID ward. My father's, diabetologist was also transferred to the COVID ward. Kidney specialists were also transferred to the COVID ward. So what happens to all the people who are not, who had other comorbidities but had no access to, hospitals at that point of time? So this question is something that again goes back to our medical education. Do we have enough doctors? We don't have those many doctors as the United Nations or the World Health Organization prescribes. We do not have enough police inspectors and police personnel that the United Nations prescribes.
Right.
So we are, although the numbers are huge, here is where again the percentages and the ratios come into play. Although the numbers are huge in terms of doctors in India, the population is so large that you still have very few people per thousand. And a lot of those very few people per thousand are concentrated in the urban areas. So your B towns and your villages rarely have even a primary health center that can take care of. Forget about everything else. The RA area in Goregaon East in Mumbai, which was the center of the controversy for Metro last year and continues to be, has multiple villages within it. They're all tribal villages. There are about, close to 100 tribal villages, or perhaps more than that. I may need to be corrected out here. Can you tell me how many primary healthcare centers are there collectively for all of them?
I'm gonna guess the
One.
answer is close
There's
to
one. Cyrus is right. There's one primary healthcare center, and this is in Mumbai.
That's why we have
Jawhar,
to.
yeah. I mean, Jawhar, which is 80 kilometers away from Mumbai, is the malnutrition capital of the state. There are more malnutrition children in Jawhar Taluka in Thane than in any other district in Maharashtra. So these are the kind of stark realities that we need to face. So which is why I go back to the policy making. I think that we didn't ramp up enough of our public health care for so many years that we're seeing the effect right now. So we better start working, right now. So when you're talking about excess deaths, it also means that we're not capturing data, enough. We're not capturing data properly. Last year, the BMC again forced all the private hospitals to submit their mortality data directly to the BMC, which is when the whole data capturing actually started. Until then, people were not even capturing that data. So simple things like that, like data capturing. So if you go to an American public healthcare website, let's say the CDC or the National Institutes of Health, you'll probably there's a different section for all the data. It's publicly available. Now, today, if I ask Cyrus, and Cyrus, you have greater access than most common people. Amit, you have greater access than most common people in Mumbai. If I ask you, Cyrus, within the next 30 seconds, can you find me the BMC bed availability dashboard for COVID? Will you be able to find it for me?
Yeah, but that's because Chahal is a personal friend. But
Yeah,
otherwise, it would be difficult. I
exactly.
accept that.
Yeah.
But I just have to pick up the call and call the
Yeah,
BMCs,
exactly.
right?
That's why I said. I mean, you have greater access than most, right? But if I am a person from Andheri East and I need a bed, I need to understand, which hospital to go to. I don't have access to that. I don't
No,
have
they don't.
public access.
We had a, one of our team members. He lives in New Bombay. They had to take him to Dombivli to find a bed, and it was because somebody knew somebody. And it's like, you're right. I mean, like, there's no clarity on any of this stuff in terms of, like, what to do if you are feeling unwell, right? And also, the thing you brought up earlier, right? The delay in testing and stuff like that. That's exactly what happened to him,
Yeah,
right? I mean, like, he was feeling unwell at the end of last week. Over the weekend, he deteriorated, and on Monday, he didn't have a test, but they were like, we need to take him to the hospital.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, like, and these stories are common. These are not
yeah.
uncommon stories today.
I mean, you open Twitter today, Amit, and you will see almost every tweet saying, "I need plasma, I need remdesivir, I need this blood group, I need a bed, I need an ICU for my father, I need an ICU for my neighbor." Uh, it's horrifying, and at the same time, you feel helpless because in my newsroom, for instance, at least 6 people have tested positive. And how do I even bring out a newspaper in such challenging times? And it's not just in Bombay. I mean, Delhi yesterday had 17,000 cases. How
Yeah.
does any city deal with this kind of explosion of a particular epidemic? Yes, testing is the first part. Treatment, access to treatment. It access to treatment, access to public health care can't be an afterthought. I mean, it has
Also,
to be. Yes. Sorry, guys. Thanks,
no,
please.
I'm saying also we need to get more doctors on hand. Many of them are not being used. Dr. Lata Mangeshkar, Dr. Vijay Malia, Dr. Sachin Tendulkar. I mean, they're all doctors. What the hell? You give them doctorates for? You're running out of doctors. Call them in.
Yeah.
Isn't that what it's all
So
about? It's like that's why we
And
have the home guards. When the army runs out, you call the home
yeah.
guards in. They're the last line of defense.
And
So all
also
these
Where's
because
Mike?
they're
Sorry, it's Mike.
honorary, and also because they're honorary doctors, they'll probably do it for free, right?
there's no question of charging. They can make a bill and keep it pending for later. I'm okay with that when times get better. Get paid in EMIs. But we have
so
to take a
also
quick break.
okay,
Silvery, it's 10:32.
okay, sure, yeah,
We'll take a quick break, then come back. Lots more to talk about.
yes.
Sachin is leading the topic, which surprisingly is COVID. What the hell is that? Okay, we're back. Silvery,
Yeah,
you
I had a
have,
question.
yeah.
So there are these reports that keep coming out about some states misreporting, underreporting on purpose. Is there any truth to that?
Uh, for fear of a
Official byline being,
for fear of a defamation case, I don't know. But see, like I said, there is testing unavailability. So so if you go to a B town in Bihar, for instance, or Uttar Pradesh, or Orissa, or West Bengal, or Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh is one of the hotspots now. If you've seen the numbers from Chhattisgarh, they're horrifying.
Hmm.
Uh, how do you get all those people to come to an urban center to test? People in Maharashtra, for instance, because in Western Maharashtra, Satara, Sangli, those areas, because there are not enough testing labs, they have to come to Pune to get themselves tested. Uh, just remember that last March 9th, when Maharashtra got its first case, again, a couple from Pune, we had just one lab, the National Institute of Virology in Pune, which was testing. Today, we have more than 1,000. And a lot of them are concentrated in the cities. So how does a person from the villages now? The reason I'm mentioning villages is because if you saw the January graph of COVID in Maharashtra, and this went unnoticed because nobody saw the. I mean, everybody's talking about how Mumbai has fallen in December and January, how Pune has fallen in December and January, how Nagpur has fallen in December and January. There was a slow growth in Amravati and Akola, in Vidarbha, and you saw a huge jump because all those people who could not get married last year because of all the restrictions were suddenly getting married in November and December. And the impact of that, of the social gatherings and all those things, were taking place in December and January. And then you suddenly saw a huge spurt in Amravati and Akola and the northern districts of Maharashtra, bordering Gujarat and bordering Chhattisgarh and bordering Madhya Pradesh, because there was constant travel, from the border states, from the border areas. You saw literally hundreds of cases where there were none, or there were only a double-digit figure. So this is why testing in all those non-urban centers is also key to finding out what is going wrong with our villages, and suddenly you'll have an explosion there, and we will not be ready for that. And which is why you saw a lot of people. If you see the daily death data from BMC, you will see that a lot of people who come here have come late because they're in the severe situation, because they didn't have access to primary healthcare or secondary healthcare in their villages, and they have been transferred at the last moment to Mumbai, which is why you have a lot of deaths recorded in Mumbai now. Close to 60 and 70 and 80, where we had only 4 or 5 in January. Now they've
Right.
gone back to 70 and 80 per day, because all those people are coming at the last moment because they're afraid of getting themselves tested, because they don't know, there's a fear that, they'll be taken away by the municipal corporation. There's a fear that they will lose their livelihoods. There's a fear that they will lose their jobs. Daily wage laborers, for instance, do not want to miss a single day of work, because how are they going to put food on the table for their children?
Yeah, that's me as well. Not to be insensitive, but I'm a bit of a daily wage earner myself. That's the whole principle of everything.
Yeah.
The right to survive. I just feel that that's been taken away by the soothsayers around, who will decide for everybody. And maybe that's a little dangerous at the end of the day. I mean,
Yeah.
you should allow people in different status of society to make this disco jaisa. Sounds horrible to say right now with a pandemic, but I'm just thinking sometimes it's not like they have a solution anyway. You just said
But
that you take the vaccine and you take the second vaccine and you still get it. At best, it'll just minimize your pain. There's
Yeah.
no guarantee for anything else. So, who are we kidding
there
then?
are no guarantees for anything, right, Cyrus? But according to what your
Advocating.
prescription, your advocacy, your advocacy basically says that what's happening in Kumbh Mela is fine, no problem.
No, I'm not saying what's happening in Kumbh Mela is
Well, no,
fine.
because they are
I'm saying
adults
that
and
you
they're
should be
doing what they
allowed
want to do,
you
and they
should be
have the
allowed to make a
freedom.
decision as to how far you want to take it in terms of your own livelihood. If you feel too scared and you need to stay at home, then you do that. No judgment. But if you need to go and ply your trade. And I just think that because, like he mentioned, for a lot of people, they lose one day of job. You're giving them sort of anxiety. The guy wants to get his daughter married off or son married off at the end of the year, and he's already thinking that he's got no money left in February, March. So you got to think it from all different.
I am,
Because
but
see,
see,
it's not a license fair state, Amit. This is not England where they're going to pay you. When they shut you
hmm.
down, they pay you there. They pay the employer a certain amount of money and say, "Stay." The state is looking after you. State is not looking after you. They're paying me for the test. I mean, I have to pay for the test. I have to pay for the COVID vaccine. I have to pay for everything. So let's not compare. Okay, we're just too
It,
larger population. There's no benevolence here. This is
but
more like
it's not a question of benevolence, right? It's a question of so I believe in minimal government interaction or interference in this stuff generally, right? But one of the few areas where government should intervene is this kind of public health emergency. This is like, honestly, this is like one of
if
the
it
things it's
if it
for.
yields the results, I salute you. But what results? The
But
2 week lockdown will give you. Now,
18
by the way,
days.
18 days. No, and Sachin, didn't he mention? My Marathi is not that good, but we heard Mr. Chahal talk about 10 days back on where 15th April around would be the peak, is what he said. The day we're
Yeah.
on.
So this
Yeah.
bears out in the TIFR study as well, that we have now reached the peak in Mumbai, and the mathematical projections. Of course, now let me use a disclaimer here. The mathematical projections consistently have been wrong for the last year. I mean, people said that we will have cases in crores. We will have deaths in millions. We haven't had that. Thankfully, we haven't had those deaths. I'm again assuming that all the deaths are accurately reported from across the country. Maharashtra, for instance, records anywhere between 250 and 280 deaths per day. Now, one death is one death too many for anybody, because we may look at it as stark numbers, but the fact is that every family is losing someone or the other, and someone or the other who's either a breadwinner or a sickly child. I mean, it doesn't matter who you've lost, but you've lost a family member. So uh, the if all the death numbers are accurate from across the country, then we have kind of avoided a death Armageddon, so to speak. But at the same time, we have lost close to 180,000 people now across the country, right? To just one disease, just COVID. We haven't had, there was an HIV emergency in the 90s, the late 80s and the 90s. We haven't lost so many people to HIV. Cholera and malaria comes back every single year, but we don't lose those many people every single day to malaria in Mumbai. I mean, we're losing 70, 80 people to COVID every day. We're losing about 250 to 300 people every day across Maharashtra. We're losing close to 1,000 people every day across India, and that is something that is unforgivable. It cannot be tolerated at any point in time. So to come back to your question, I think a lot of emphasis needs to be given in terms of getting people to the hospital first. I mean, everything else, your Ayurvedic, your homeopathy, and everything can come. Please bring that later. Whatever faith that you have. I mean, I don't believe that homeopathy works, but a lot of people have faith in homeopathy, for instance. So
Faith is the right word. That's
yeah,
the only
yeah,
thing you can
yeah,
have.
yeah.
You can't have
So
like
I mean, there is no
anything.
scientific backing to it. But
Exactly.
if you get a person to go to a physician or a person who can give you accurate medical advice, that's the first noblest thing you can do to yourself and to your family. Because you're going to I've heard of cases where people have ignored their initial symptoms, and within days, within hours, their oxygen levels have plummeted from 95, 96 to 78 and 80, and they're unable to breathe. And by the time it's too late, and I can say that from personal experience. I mean, I had a brain stroke in 2016, and if my colleagues hadn't taken me to the hospital within an hour, I would have died. My colleagues actually in the previous newsroom that I was working in, actually lifted me and took me to the hospital without even waiting for the ambulance. We reached on time. The diagnosis was done on time. The surgery started on time, and it was like all the planets have aligned to keep me alive. But it doesn't happen with most people. It doesn't happen with people who do not have access to healthcare close enough that even the time uh, from your house to the doctor's place may be fatal for you. One of the most interesting studies that was done, actually, Mr. Chahal will talk to you if you have a chat with him whenever you can. Last year, the BMC data showed that a lot of people in COVID care centers and hospitals were dying between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. And so everybody started discussing, why is this happening? And people realized that between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., those people who were severely affected with COVID and they did not have urinating facilities at their bed had to stand up and go to the nearest bathroom. And that walk, just that walk from the bed to the bathroom, it could be 20 feet, it could be 30 feet, depending on the size of the hospital or the COVID care center. That walk of 20 feet, 30 feet proved to be fatal. And which is why a lot of people started getting breathless by just walking those 30, 40 feet. And by the time they came back, uh, after relieving themselves back to the bed, it was too late. Can you imagine the kind of severity we are facing for our patients when they can't even go to the bathroom to relieve themselves? It is that bad. I mean, people have to realize that wearing masks and social distancing and hand hygiene is so basic that it will literally save your lives. And we don't want a situation where even a simple basic human thing like going to the bathroom proves fatal for you. So after that, Mr. Chahal, God bless his soul, he actually installed CCTV cameras in all the COVID care centers. He ensured that there is a nurse available for one nurse for every 4 beds or 5 beds. So that became policy. So we're learning from this, but I don't know whether we're learning fast enough to save enough lives. I'm sorry I went on a rant, but this
No,
is
but
what.
we've got AMAs to do, and Cyrus has got to leave soon because it's his shoot day. But I have one question for you, right? You kept bringing up the idea of or the fact that policy has failed us, right? Health policy. What do you think are the like big prescriptions over here? Like big picture, like big things, like a couple of big things that you think they should do over there?
Or should
Um,
have done.
so there are several prescriptions. I mean, it is not for me to decide what those prescriptions are, but
You study this stuff, you
yeah,
know it.
yeah.
So I
So
mean,
as a
better than we do.
as as a person who's been reading up on this and a person who's interacted with a lot of doctors and people so first the first big thing is that with whatever infrastructure that we need to have multiple primary healthcare centers, and that could be in the form of a dispensary, that could be in the form of a primary healthcare center where there are nurses and doctors and maybe one surgeon, whatever. But at every point in time, I need to have access to public healthcare. uh, so if you look at, Cyrus spoke about England. The NHS is equal for a billionaire and to the beggar on the street. You may find it difficult to get an appointment with the NHS immediately, but the fact is that you can enter an emergency room in the NHS and in an NHS hospital in England without any fear and get treatment as equal as the next bed billionaire. Uh, so you can be so that is the kind of equality that we need in our in our public healthcare system. uh, the second thing is that if you're looking at medical education as a whole, uh, we need to have better policies in setting up medical institutes of at least national eminence, if not international eminence. We need multiple medical education facilities like that. The third part is, once you have those primary healthcare centers and secondary healthcare centers and even tertiary hospitals, uh, we need to have uh, enough and more para or healthcare workers, apart from nurses, but also look at the parallel healthcare infrastructure. Um, it is important because when you don't have access to immediate primary healthcare, who do you go to? What happens there? Is there enough you know para healthcare workers in your village or in your town, in your B town, in your urban centers, to give me access to that? Like I mentioned in the previous segment, where do those people of RA villages, 100 plus RA villages, go to if there's no primary healthcare center? The nearest you can do is actually come out to the Goregaon East Western Express Highway, which may be about 10 or 15 kilometers away from where they live. So all those things need to be taken care of. But the first thing is, invest more in public healthcare in our budget. It's not just about paying doctors' salaries, because those are but actually look at building up infrastructure at the most basic level. It's not just about building 10 AIMS centers across the country. It is not just that. It is about I getting access to something which is just 3 minutes away from my house. Can I get that? So there are multiple prescriptions. I'm sure a better public healthcare expert can come in the show and elucidate on all of this. But I think as a citizen speaking for people affected by this pandemic, uh, this is the least we can do to save our citizens.
Yep.
That's
And probably should have done and haven't done. So now we are playing catch up. But anyway,
Yes.
enough cynicism. Let's move on to the AMAs. Silvery,
Yeah.
it's been a lot of doom
Sure.
and gloom. It's like the first
Yeah.
6 years of my marriage. The seventh year was very good because she went to South Africa for 6 months. But that's another podcast for another day. Yeah, tell me.
actually somebody put a comment in that Cyrus is looking dejected. So hope that the week that wasn't shoot doesn't get depressing.
No, but I'm also a minority fighting my own little small battles here, anti-lockdown and this and that. So I'm letting Sachin make his point because he has a very balanced viewpoint about everything and is not rabid in any way. So, which I think is half the problem we're having. People just settle on one side of the fence or the other and go on and don't explore actually as we should with our minds and reasoning to see what is really working rather than just take on information and say that's it, we're going to die, which we are going to. Existentialism is proven to be true. You live, you die.
True.
Silvery?
Right. Let's get to the AMAs. First one comes in from Jan Bukes. This is probably the only non-COVID related AMA that we have. He
Yeah.
says, AMA for Sachin. How did the interest in Kung Fu come? I know you will talk about
Kung
COVID
Fu.
in detail anyway. So how did the
Not Kung
interest in
Fu,
Kung Fu?
Sumo, no?
Sumo. Yeah.
Sumo. Okay, how did the interest
Yeah,
like?
There's a huge difference.
yeah.
How
And
did the
I'll
interest in Sumo come?
just I'll just throw in a quick plug. Sachin was on the Filter Coffee podcast, and he spoke extensively about the sumo. This, so please do check that out. But
Yeah.
sorry, please, Sachin, answer. I have to plug when I can, no, a little bit.
You must, you must. I'll also plug sumo. Please don't consider sumo deadlifting. A totally different thing. Go on, Sachin. Carry on.
So sumo is a most fascinating sport. I mean, it's a sport that has not changed its rules for literally thousands of years. I mean, it's close to 1600 years since the whole tradition of sumo began. But it's in the last 400 years that the rules have been formalized. So in the Edo period in Japan. But how did my interest come? I mean, Jambukes follows me on Twitter, so we have conversations quite often. Um, uh, so when we were small, Cyrus, you may remember that Pranay Roy used to have this show called The World This Week,
Of
right?
course. Doesn't
The,
mean that I'm not younger than you, but yes, please carry on.
he had a segment on sumo wrestling, which lasted for maybe a minute, and that kind of got me intrigued. But at that point of time, we did not have enough international television. We certainly did not have the internet. So when I started looking for sources for sumo wrestling in terms of watching it, this was about 6-7 years ago, I found that there are multiple TV channels, YouTube channels that are giving
Dedicated to it.
dedicated to it, and I fell just deep into it, so much so that now for the last 6 years, sumo is the only religion I follow.
Converted to the religion of sumo. Two
Yes.
fat Japanese men pushing each
Yeah.
other out of the ring. A sport that lasts 16 to 18 seconds.
Yes.
Amazing. I'm all for it. And they're superstars, aren't they?
They
Like,
are superstars. So they are. I mean, if you reach the rank of the yokozuna, which is different from the yokozuna that is there in the WWE and
not anymore, yeah.
So the yokozuna is the highest rank that you can get. It is bigger than Roger Federer. It is bigger than being Sachin Tendulkar. It is bigger than being Gary Kasparov.
Is it bigger than the Prime Minister's office?
Um,
Awkward pause. Sumo got caught out. Kalbag has to go back to Kalbag. All right, this is sumo.
All right. Yeah. Next one. Next one. So there are two similar questions from Sachin Jangam and from Tanuj. The question is: on one hand, central government is submitting before Delhi High Court that they can't allow people in the masjid to offer namaz, and on the other hand, they are continuing with Kumbh in Haridwar. Is there a discrepancy? Is that what do you
Yeah.
guys think?
No, of course there is. I mean, but what happens in the courts, and this is some nuance that we need to have here. See, the Delhi government is led by the Aam Aadmi Party, and the Delhi government, makes a submission in the court about something, and the UP government or the Uttarakhand government allows something to happen in their state. So, in terms of each government following its own policy, they are on two sides of the table out here. But if you pull yourself out and you take a 30,000 feet view of that, of course it is, of course it's wrong. I mean, you can't have one policy for one event and another policy for another event. So the moment and the same thing goes for all the political rallies that are happening in all the states that have gone for the elections. Now, I don't know to what extent will West Bengal suffer because of all the political rallies that have taken place there. I don't know to what extent, and the impact will come not now because the event has happened now. The impact will come 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later if we do
So-
enough testing. If we understand that the data capture is accurate, then we'll get to know. Delhi, for instance, has already gone from 300 cases a day last month to 17,000 cases a day now. Delhi, which is neighboring all the other, Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand and Haryana and all those places. So we have a situation here where because the policies are not consistent for all, and this is something that that is a difference between Indian secularism, and I'm probably going to get a lot of trolling for this, but the difference between Indian secularism and the original definition of French secularism, which is where the concept comes from, is that the French have completely separated church from state. That is their definition of secularism. In the Indian definition of secularism is that you treat all religions equally, which is not possible in the practical way, because how do you treat, suppose you have 3 kids, are you going to treat every kid in the exact same way at the exact same point? You can't do that. It is just not practically possible. And which each political party having its own political ideology, uh, it's just not possible in a country like India. We are multicultural, we are multilingual. uh, Heck, you can't even have the same policy from Vidarbha, which speaks Hindi primarily because it's on the border with Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, and same policy for Ratnagiri, which is on the western side, the western side of Maharashtra. So it's just completely. So either you have the same policy for everyone, which is that stop
But
public events, which is what the logical thing should have
Sachin,
been.
why hasn't enough politicians spoken about Kumbh Mela? The same ones who run Maharashtra, for example, don't mention at all anything about Kumbh Mela. I mean, shouldn't they? Considering it's a rival faction running it anyway, but they don't. Nobody's taking that on ever.
I'm
Uh,
I'm a little dejected by the whole political silence over this, and uh, primarily because the people who allowed it are the people who are actually defining all those policies, right? I mean,
exactly.
so if we had said, for example, in Maharashtra or even in Mumbai, you had Section 144 imposed, and it says that nobody above 5 people can't congregate at one place, right? I every day I used to take my daughter out for a walk with my dog, and now I'm afraid that if I take my daughter, they will ask me to go back home. So it's just that me and my dog going out, because I don't want any police person to stop me in the middle of the road and say
Correct.
go back home, right?
Hmm.
So if that can be strictly imposed in an urban center here, why don't we strictly impose in anywhere else? I mean, it is clearly a public health emergency. There is
Yeah.
no two ways about it. So, uh, I mean, while
But
we
no, but
can endlessly debate on what secularism means, the
yeah.
fact is that for a public health emergency like COVID, you cannot have one policy for one area or one community and another policy for another area and another community.
So, well, they shouted us to wear masks and use sanitizers and be careful and social distance. The Kumbh Mela carries on without anybody saying anything about it from political platforms. That's not happened at all. None of them have come out and said, well, how can we have this? Not one. They are erring on the side of caution in terms of vote banking, I presume. And so that's just not going to be called out. And so it
Yeah.
continues. And then it makes a mockery out of everything, all said and done. When you have 28 million people bathing or 31 million people wandering around in a small area, it is a small area at the end of the day. Uh, I give up. Amit, let's accept defeat.
But what can you say? I mean, like counterfact, do you think our states are too big? Because I mean, like you were mentioning the same policies in Vidarbha versus Ratnagiri, right? And the how the one size fits all rule, right? That doesn't seem like it's a practical thing from any, it's just not going to work for a country the size of India, right? Where like, you have a single diktat that goes everywhere. More localization, I think, is probably the appropriate this, but then again, it's not local enough also, where you're having policies which are again trying to be too widely distributed. I don't know. I feel like the states,
Yeah,
the
it's
administration of this stuff is
us
just
not being a
too.
homogeneous population has been a huge problem.
Yeah.
I think for everything, because everything is a little, here and there. It's just too much variety,
Yeah.
and the sheer size. So Sachin is an uphill battle anyway.
No, it
Like,
is. But just to counter what Amit was saying, see, the Indian states were created out of language.
right.
There were many options with the politicians and the policymakers at that point of time, but they decided that language is the one unifying force that will create one state. So Maharashtra went with Marathi, Gujarat went with Gujarati, and Karnataka went with Kannada. Uh, the homogeneity of policy is not really homogeneous in the larger sense if we look at all the municipal corporations and the other local self-government, local governments of each of these districts. So while Vidarbha will have its own, or districts or cities within Vidarbha region will have its own municipal corporation deciding its own policies for the locals, Ratnagiri will have its own. But what the state government does and what the central government does has an impact on the larger population. So a municipal corporator or a councillor is not the same as an MLA, because the MLA will decide laws for the entire state. So I don't think there is any problem in that sense. I mean, we are the local self. I mean, the BMC, for instance, in India, in Mumbai, is as powerful in terms of getting policies out for its residents in Mumbai as the Pune Municipal Commissioner is for Pune. So the Pune policies don't affect Mumbai and vice versa. The state government has also said that when it comes to COVID, each municipal division will have the right to determine its own policy. For instance, just to give you a small example, the state government notification when it came from on April 1st about the Maharashtra state government notification came on April 1st about the curfew. It did not mention two things. One is, can domestic helps go to senior citizens' homes and help them with their chores? And two, whether e-commerce can be delivered 24/7. That decision was actually made by Iqbal Singh Chahal, who is the municipal commissioner of Mumbai. And the very next day, he sent out an order which said that domestic helps are now part of the essential services category and they will not be stopped by anybody. So domestic helps can go to people's houses. And secondly, he said e-commerce deliveries will be allowed 24/7. And now, of course, it's only essential services, that is food and beverages and stuff like that. But the municipal commissioner of Mumbai is powerful enough to get that done. The second thing is, even the Bombay Police Act of 1950, I think, gives the Mumbai Police Commissioner a lot of powers to influence policy within the policing policy within the city of Mumbai. So there are multiple, how do I put it, gatekeepers. There are multiple people who can influence policy, but they all have to talk to each other. I mean, the Bombay Police Commissioner cannot decide on his own or her own without the without the knowledge of the state government, because ultimately the Mumbai Police Commissioner will report to the Home Minister of the state, law and order being a state subject. So there are multiple checks and balances in our system. We have our faults, but I don't think we are as bad as it is made out to be. But I think we can work through the the chinks in the armor, the faults in our lines, so to speak.
Okay. Unfortunately, the BMC chief has called me to shoot right now to do my bit to help make Mumbai into a brighter place. So I have to stop here. Amit, Sachin, and Silvery, are you guys carrying on?
No, I think we're good. Let's.
We're good. Okay.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we will make up for this dark episode with shady overtones of pain and brutality and violence. We will have a very silly episode planned, which Silvery has no idea yet about, right?
No, he better have an idea who's there tomorrow.
We have Aisha Chinoy coming on tomorrow.
Aisha Chinoy, who sent us a book, 25 copies of a book came over to me. And I've already started selling them online because Chahal has said that we can deliver things through e-commerce 24/7.
Alternative livelihood, Cyrus.
Very interesting. Thank you, Sachin, for depressing all of us, but in a nice way. In a nice way. I mean, it's not your fault there's a pandemic, for God's sake. Yeah. All right. We'll see everybody soon. In the meantime, returning to duty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.